I want to record this, so give me a second. So the next question, so population is a group of individuals in the same species, and it brings another question then, what does species mean? Who can tell me what species means then? What does species mean? Seems like an easy question.
A group of organisms, and like they all like share something, like some sort of trait or gene.
Can't like only species like reproduce and are fertile?
Nice one, Britton. Nice one. Yeah, that's right. A group of organisms that can reproduce with each other. In fact, they can reproduce and produce a viable and fertile offspring. So, what are some examples of organisms that are not the same species that can produce an offspring that are not fertile or viable?
Like a tiger and a lion.
That's right. So a tiger and a lion can come together to produce a liger, and I believe is it L-I or L-Y? I don't know. I'm guessing L-I. A liger, and a liger is sterile. So yeah, a liger is real. A liger is alive. A liger is viable, but it can't produce. It can't do the second half of. It can't do the second half. It can't produce a viable or fertile offspring. Then of course you have the idea of a horse and a donkey.
What does it mean to be viable and fertile?
So viable, it's in your book when in that chapter 12 again. But viable would be a creature that can survive. So, fertile means it can have babies. So a liger is viable; it can survive. In fact, it's bigger than a lion and a tiger, but it's sterile. So it's not. That's why tigers and lions are not the same species. A horse and a donkey can produce something called a mule, and the mule is also sterile. It cannot produce offspring. So these two are not the same species. Viable, so you have to be able to survive. The offspring, there are individuals that can produce offspring that might not be sterile, but they won't survive very long. They die quickly. So the fact that they're not sterile is irrelevant because they cannot reproduce because they can't survive long enough. Does that make sense to everyone so far? All right, so that would be what that's a definition of a species. Next week, we will discuss, and it's in your chapter reading that you've been assigned. So or you've been told that you should read. But to be clear, there are other definitions of a species because this doesn't always work. This doesn't always work. It's like, for instance, you can't really talk about the fossil record, right? So when we look at the fossil record and we say, well, here's this species of Tyrannosaurus rex, we can't tell if it was able to mate with another species of dinosaur and produce viable offspring. We can't tell that. So we have to define it more like Islam Bouli did a minute ago, which is looking at structures, common structures, and phenotypes, right? So there is more than one definition. In fact, there's at least 5 that we'll talk about in this class of what a species is. But this is kind of the biological, simple definition of a species that works a lot of the time. But it doesn't work all the time. So we got to be careful with defining species in only one way. Then a population of that species is a group of those individuals in a specific area. It could be a valley, a pond, it could be the United States, it could be the world, right? So the population is defined by the area. Then there's this idea of gene pool. I think someone mentioned it earlier. What does gene pool mean to you? What does gene pool mean to you?
Like all the alleles in a population.
That's exactly right. So a gene pool is all the alleles in a population. So all the versions of the genes in the specific locus in that particular population. So I'm going to use then a couple other, I want to discuss those 5 things that are necessary for no evolution to exist. Then I'll talk a little bit about what an example of a gene pool before we go and look at the experiment that you're going to do next week. So there's five. What does there need to be for no evolution to occur? For a population not to evolve? To be clear, it's very difficult for this actually to exist for any extended period of time. It's unlikely that a population will not evolve at all. And to be clear what evolution is, we should talk about evolution. Do you know a definition, at least a definition of evolution?
Species changing themselves to survive and adapt better.
I like that idea. Anything else? And they don't change themselves, though, by the way. I would take issue. The only thing I take issue with is saying change themselves. But go ahead. I guess in a way, actually, I take that back. In a way, you make a good point. So I just don't. There are problems with it, but it's not bad. Changing what, Iman?
I was about to say, when a species changes itself to better suit the environment.
Okay, when a species change, see there goes. It's that itself part is the only issue I have. So it's a change in allele frequency. It's a change in allele frequency. It's just that simple. The species does not change. You don't decide that. You don't decide, gee, I need to be bigger, or my children should be bigger. And then, you focus and you do something, and then your babies are bigger. That's not how it happens. It's through death and survival of the fittest that you get the bigger babies. That's all there is to it. So it's not really the species that's doing anything about it. It's a combination of various factors. So in order to understand what evolution is, let's look at what it takes for evolution not to happen. How do we get this allele frequency to stay the same? And how does that change the species, by the way? How does that change the population? Let me be very clear. What do alleles do? What do alleles do, Ogechi? They determine traits. They determine phenotypes. So if you change the allele frequency, you change what the creature looks like. Correct? All right. No evolution. What does it take? Let's be clear. The first thing you need to have is a large population size. The smaller your population, sorry?
Isn't this like the 5 points for the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium?
That's right. That's what those 5 points mean. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Let me be clear. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium means when no evolution is occurring. Is that clear?
Yes, it's clear.
When you are at Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, that is when no evolution is occurring. Period. And what does that look like? You need 5 things to be happening. In order for Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium to be correct, in order for no evolution to be occurring, the first is you need a large population size. If your population size is too small, then the allele frequency will change simply because somebody falls off a cliff. Think about it this way. If there's 10 of us in this room, think about it this way. If you have 10 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And only one of us has the little a allele. Everyone else has big A allele. They all have big A, big A. Only one of us has a little a. Only one of us has a version of a gene, whatever that is. What if that individual falls off a cliff and dies? We went from 1/10, right? The frequency was 1/10, 1 out of 10, and now is what? 0 out of 9. Do you agree?
Yeah.
So a small population, in a small population, random events change the allele frequency. Remember, the triangle means change. It's not, so your population size has to be very, very big. So let's think about it this way. If you had the same percentage, the same frequency of the allele in the American human population, that would mean it's 1/10 out of 300 million. Is that correct? If the allele frequency was 1 out of 10 out of 300 million, then it would be much harder for a random event to get rid of 1/10 of 100 million. Do you agree? Or 300 million? What is 1/10 of 300 million? What's 1/10 of 300 million? 30 million. So you'd have to have 30 million individuals die without any natural selection occurring, just randomly dying. That would be very difficult to do, especially since we're dispersed across the entire United States. So that's not likely. So population size, the larger the population, the less likely evolution is going to occur because of population size. So a small population leads to evolution, where a large population size will lead to no evolution. Are we all okay with that so far?
Yeah.
All right. So the second step is no migration. So to be clear, that means no immigration, which means what?
Going into a place.
Right, so it goes in, going in, nothing coming in. And no emigration, which means what?
Opposite.
Yeah, opposite, no leaving of the population. No one's leaving, no one's coming. If that same 1/10, 1 out of 10, just left, instead of dies, it just left, again, you'd go from 1 out of 10 as a frequency to 0 out of 9. So immigrate, or if you had, all of a sudden you had another 10 individuals come in, and all of them had little a, you go from 1/10 to, 11 out of 20. So you've changed the frequency of the allele again. So you have evolution. Are we all good with this?
Yes.
All right, so let's look at 3. So no migration can happen. If you have migration, it's likely you're going to have evolution. So 3, no mutation. Mutation is the ultimate source of variation. So you can't have mutation. No mutation. So think about it. If you had that 1/10, that 1 out of 10 had the little a, what if that one mutated its DNA from little a to big A? What if it went from little a to big A? Then you went to 0. Now there's 0 out of 10 in that population that has little a. So mutation can easily change the frequency of the alleles in a gene pool immediately. Again, assuming it survives. 4, you have to have random, in order for no evolution to occur, you have to have random mating. What's the opposite of random mating? By the way, mutation always occurs eventually. So that's one of the reasons why you can have no evolution. You can't have no evolution occurring for an extended period of time, because all these things change, right, over time. Random mating. What's the opposite of random mating?
Natural selection?
Close.
Would it be artificial selection?
Close. That is a solution. That both are true. Artificial selection is non-random mating. You're absolutely right. But in nature, what would be an example of non-random mating? Artificial selection, by definition. In fact, I'm even going to put it out here. That is done by humans. All right, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in nature, there's random mating, which is possible, and then so when two worms find themselves in the dirt, as soon as they find themselves, they have sex. They make a big ball of worms. They exchange gametes. They're pregnant, and they go on and they lay their eggs. Completely random. There's no selection there. So, but birds do select. So what's the difference? It's not.
So like a peacock like would pick another peacock with like fat feathers.
Or bright feathers. Yeah, it's called sexual selection. All right. So you're selecting for something for a type. If that's not random, that's not random. So that's the opposite. And maybe I should just do the opposite in a different color. So sexual selection leads to evolution. Where random selection or mating does not. And so no migration. If there's migration, obviously there's evolution. Large population size, small population size leads to event and change frequency, so it leads to evolution. Large population, no evolution, right? So yeah, that's right. The peacock is an example. Birds having bright feathers are females selecting the opposite of what they are, because most birds, not all birds, but most birds choose individuals with bright colors. Female birds choose bright colors, but male birds choose females that don't have bright colors. So there's two kinds. We have a positive and a negative version of this. The negative is when they choose opposite what they are. And the positive is when they choose like themselves. And you see that in humans. Some female humans choose individuals that are very different from themselves, or males choose females that are very different from themselves, and some choose individuals that are very much like themselves. So it could go either way. In humans, humans have much more variation with the selection process. But with animals, what you find is usually a species is going to pick one that's like itself or one that's very different from itself. So when you look at the peacock, the female peacock chooses the very bright colored peacock, where the male peacock chooses the less colorful peacock. There's all kinds of reasons for that, and the bottom line is that it's this sexual selection that drives that evolution. those feathers and that color is not an advantage against predators. So the fact that you have these big tail feathers don't allow you to fly any further or faster. They don't give you they don't use them as weapons against tigers or lions. These are things that are not useful to survive the individual day to day. The only thing that's useful for these colorful feathers is to attract the female. All right, 5. The last thing that you would need for there not to be any evolution is that there's no advantage to the allele. The allele has no advantage over the other alleles. So big A does not give the individual a better chance to survive than little a. There's no advantage to the allele. So that's the last thing that you have to have. Obviously, most of the time. Now, here's where somebody mentioned it earlier. This is where natural selection takes place. So natural selection would not, in a case of, for there not to be any evolution, there would be no natural selection. There's no advantage to whatever allele you had. No phenotype had an advantage over any other phenotype. Then again, that rarely happens in nature. So that would be no natural selection. Artificial selection is one of the reasons why it boggles my mind that people don't believe evolution happens. We've taken wolves, right, over however many years, probably thousands of years, and we've artificially selected to an extent that we finally got dogs. Dogs are directly related to wolves. The only difference between a wolf and a dog is that we've constantly selected them for certain traits. How much they pay attention to us, how helpful they are, how well they listen to us. That's the number one trait that we bred into dogs. When I say breed into dogs, I mean we selected the pups that had the traits that we wanted. That's how we selected. We made sure that those pups had babies. And then we crossed them, we mated those with other pups that had those characteristics. And after many generations, we got what we call a dog. And then after a while, we started to breed them for all kinds of traits. Really big dogs like Great Danes and Irish Wolfhounds. Really small dogs like Chihuahuas.
Wait, Mendoza,
Uh,
are you sharing your screen?
yeah. Are you guys not seeing it?
Well, I can't see it.
All this time you haven't been able to see it?
No, I've seen it before, but then my computer restarted.
Okay, so I'll forward the recording to everybody. So anyways, how did we get big dogs that are so tall that they're as tall as a tall human? What we did, how we did that is we kept breeding the big puppies, the taller puppies with taller puppies with taller puppies for generation to generation. We selected for organisms that had the traits that we want. Even though nature may not have allowed them to be that way, the biggest example of this is an English bulldog. An English bulldog would not exist in nature. We artificially selected a bulldog. An English bulldog's nose is so small it has a hard time cooling off. That's why they don't run around so much. It's not because they're lazy. It's because they get overheated because their snouts are so short. They're not very fast. They're not great biters. Their heads are so big that you have to do a C-section to give most English bulldogs born. You have to actually cut them out of the mother because the heads are too big to fit through the mother's pelvis. This is the reality of the English Bulldog. It's the example of us selecting for traits that are not going to be successful in nature. So this is the impact of artificial selection. We've done this for over 10,000 years, since before the birth of Christ. We have selected bulls, wheat. For instance, corn. Did you know corn is not? Who loves corn in the summer?
I do.
I like corn.
With some butter on it, some salt, right?
Mhm.
So that corn is amazing. Did you know corn was not naturally yellow? Did you know corn was actually a bunch of different colors? The corn in its natural form looks a lot different. But we selected for the traits that today we call corn. The corn you see today is due to artificial selection. We chose the yellow because we like it. We like it yellow. We chose the big ears of corn because they give us a lot of food. We chose that. So a lot of the things that you see in our domesticated animals and plants are traits that we evolved. Have you ever seen those little day glow fish? Those fish that you buy. In fact, I have a couple of them in my aquarium. They're really odd colored. They don't glow in the dark, but they're really, really bright colored, neon fish they call them. You ever see them in the aquarium, in the store at all?
Yeah.
Well, they're not natural. They don't exist in nature. We bred that into them. All right. So all that being said, let's take a look at the population. So that's artificial selection. That's natural selection. That's the list of things that have to happen for evolution not to occur. You can see why, if the opposite happens, they do occur. Evolution does occur. Now let's quickly talk a little bit about this population. So if we and what this gene pool idea is, if you have a bunch of individuals in a population, right? And these individuals, let's say you have 100,000 individuals in the population. If you have 100,000 individuals, do you understand if the organisms are diploid? If you have 100,000 individuals for diploid organisms, how many alleles do you have?
Can you repeat the question?
If you have 100,000 individuals and they're diploid, how many alleles do you have in the population? I'll wait for an answer because. Say that again.
200,000.
That's right. It's 200,000. And the reason is that diploid means you have 2 copies of every gene. So you have 200,000 different alleles. Now, of those alleles, let's use R and big R. I'm going to tell you right now that the lab uses R and big R. I disagree with it. I wish they would have used a different notation because, and I'll show you why when we do the lab. They're dealing with a codominant situation, which means it's not dominant or recessive. And so because of that, they really should not have used big R and little r, in my opinion. But let's going to go ahead and use the notation that they use in the lab. So out of those 200,000, there's some percentage that are going to be big R. Who knows what that percentage is? There's some percentage that's going to be little r. So that also means that there's some percentage that's going to be big R, and there's some percentage that's going to be big R, little r. And then some percentage is going to be little r, little r. In the lab, big R is gold. The fish are gold. In the lab, the big R, little r are spotted. And because this is a codominant situation. And in the lab, little r is actually white. So the great thing, the most amazing thing about codominance is that if you know the color, you know the genotype. Do you see that? Do you see that?
Yeah.
So what's great about that is that if I tell you, what if I tell you that out of those 200,000 individuals in this gene pool, in this population, out of those 200,000 genes, alleles, that of those individuals, that let's see, that there's 100,000 individuals, let's say 50,000 were gold, and I tell you that 25,000 were spotted, then I told you another 25,000 were white. Can you fill in the rest of the numbers? Given that information, could you tell me how many big R's you had? How many? Let me redo that. I can't really write that as a chart. How many big R's do you have? The number of big R's. Can you tell me the number of big R little r's and the number of little r's?
Yeah.
All right, tell me.
So you just use the equation. So given that there's 50,000 gold, that would be 50,000 divided by 200,000.
Close. Right. That would be percentage. That's correct. You're absolutely right. You're going to percentage. That's right. It's 50,000. 50,000 is what you get. I just want to know the number.
The percent would be 25% for the.
Right. It's if you wanted to go and do percentages of the percentages, then you would, in order to calculate the percentages, then you would say 50,000 divided by 100,000. Did I get that right? Well, yeah, that would only tell you the percentage of gold fish, but that's not really the you're kind of skipping a step. So let's just go ahead and just do this. How many big R's do you have? 50,000, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, how many big R little r's do you have?
25,000.
25,000, okay. And how many little r's do you have?
25,000.
And 25,000. Everybody see that? Does everybody see that? Yes or no? I'll wait again. In the room, you all see that? People in
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yes.
All right, thank you. He's like pulling teeth every day. It's so exhausting. All right, so you got 50,000, 25,000, 25,000, right? These are your genotypes. Now, what I think it was Gavin, was I right? It was Gavin who was talking earlier. He was trying to figure out the percentage of big R, big R. He was not far off. What was his problem? He used 50,000. He was dividing by 200,000. What's his problem?
That only tells you the percent.
Nope. That only tells you the percent of fish, of gold fish. If you did 50,000 out of 100,000. If you did 50,000 out of 100,000, that's not correct either, because if you have 50,000 gold fish, 50,000 that are big R, how many big R's does that give you? How many big R's does that give you? If you have 50,000 that are big R, how many big R's do you get all together?
You get 10,000. 100,000.
That's right. You have 100,000 big R's. How many big R's did you get? Any big R's any other way?
You can get big R's from the spotted fish.
Yeah, you get a big R from this group too. How many big R's? You don't get 25,000. How many do you get?
Half of that, so
50,000.
12,500, correct? Big R's from the spotted fish. Are we all good with that idea? So altogether for big R's, I have 112,500 big R's. That's how many I have. And if I want to know the percentage of big R's, right? Now I gotta say, Gavin was right if he wanted to find out the percentage of big R, big R. He's right. It would be the percentage of big R would be 50,000 divided by 100,000, 100,000, not 200,000, right? Because that's the genotype of the individual. And there's out of all those fish, only 50,000 out of 100,000, because that's the number of individuals. But if we're talking about the number of alleles, we got to add up all the alleles. And there's each of these 50,000 have 2 alleles. Each of these 25,000 only have 1 big R allele. So that's why we add it up and we get 12,500. And now we're not dividing by 100,000, we're dividing by how much?
112,500.
Divided by what? To get the percent big R.
But 200,000?
200,000 is correct. Because that's the total number of alleles in the gene pool, in the pool of genes. The whole pool, there's 200,000 genes. Of those 200,000 genes, 112,500 are big R. Now, what about little r? What percentage little r is there? That took it, what we just did.
It would be 50,000 plus 72.5 thousand over 200,000.
All right, so let's do the math here. We get 12,500, correct? From this group. We got little r here, gives you 12,000, which is half of the 25, because this 25,000, only half their genes are little r, plus this 25,000, which both their genes are little r. But it's 25,000 times 2, because it's each of these 25,000 have 2 little r's. So we'd have to add them up, and we'd have to have 50,000 plus 12,500.
So it would be 62,500.
Yeah, 62,500. And then we would take 62,500 and divide it by 200,000. And what does that give you? Some percent, right? Times 100, it would give you some percent of little r. Multiply times 100, and you get percent, and you get your percent. I don't know what that would be, but if you add those two percentages, they better equal 100, because all the alleles in this population better equal 100. You all agree with that? Because that's 100% of all the alleles, correct?
Yeah. I see what you're doing now. So you see the blue box? Those two percentages should add up to equal 1, right?
Yes. R and big R, those two percentages should equal 100%. So when we talk about P and Q, P plus Q must equal 1. P is the probability of one allele, in this case it'll be R, and Q is the probability of another allele, in this case it would be little r. So this is little r, and that the probability of big R would be here, and that is, it must equal 1 in decimal. So if you did this decimal, if you didn't use percentages and you did the decimal, then these two decimal forms, somebody do the math.
We did something wrong then. Because if you add up the numerator, it doesn't equal 200,000. So it can't equal 1.
Let me see. We may have done something wrong. I was kind of rushing it. Let's see, 112. We said that there was 100,000, 50,000, 25,000, 25,000. This does equal 100,000 individuals, so that's right. All right, so this should be double, that's 50. This should be half of this, that's 12,500. This should be double, that should be 100,000. And this should be 12,500. So that should be 100 plus, that's double, that's 100,000 112,500. Well, you added 112,500 and 62,000.
That doesn't get 200,000. That gets like 175,000.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong, but we got it. We gotta get moving on this, but I do want to figure out what I did wrong. I know it's obvious I must have done something wrong. Do you understand what he's saying? Is that this number here, this big number here, 112,500, and this number here, 62,500, should equal 200,000. That's what should happen.
For the big
Help me
R,
out. What
little
did I
R,
do wrong?
for the big R, little R, should it be 2,500 like of each?
So big R, little r, 12,500 of each. Yeah, that would equal 25,000, right? So it
No,
should
I
be.
was saying like, shouldn't it be 25,000 per the big R,
Oh,
little R?
that's it. You're absolutely right. I don't know. You're right. I did that wrong. Thank you for catching that. Whew. I don't know what I would do if people didn't pay attention. I'd be lost. Thank you. Absolutely right. Thank you. Did you see that, Gavin? Did you see that, the rest of y'all? See how I messed up? I messed that up. I apologize. Let's go ahead and take a look at that again. And Gavin's absolutely right. It should equal 200,000 in the end. So it's 25,000. It is half. It's not, here is 50,000, and there's here's 50,000, and there's two of them, so that's 100,000. That's correct. So here there's 25,000 of each. So it's not 50,000. It's 25,000. So that's right. And that's where I messed up. I divided when I didn't have to. Man, that's a nice catch. Who caught that? Goddard, right? Good catch. So it's 1,250, 125,000. Does everybody agree? Am I doing it right now?
Yeah.
And then this one, the little r, would be 50,000 because two 25,000s. And then little r would be 25,000. And that's 75,000. Does that add up? That adds up to 200,000. So that's good. Whew. I thought I was going crazy there for a second. All right, so then it's 75,000 divided by 200,000 is going to get you your number. Everybody okay with that? Can't wait to get my new iPad.
Yes.
All right, so yeah, P, the probability of P is the probability of one allele, Q is the probability of another allele. Those probabilities in decimal form should equal 1. That's where this comes from, P plus Q equals 1. So doing some algebraic manipulation, what should happen is that you should be able to get P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. Now, let's describe why it's squared and why there's a 2 here. So these are the probabilities of getting that particular allele combination. Is that clear?
Yeah.
So when you have two probabilities and you want to know what are the probabilities of two separate events occurring together or in a row, then you multiply the probabilities of the individual chances together. So in the case of getting two big R's in a row, in other words, getting a fish that's big R, then it's P squared. Because it doesn't matter if you get a big R from mom or a big R from dad, you're still going to end up with big R. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so it's P squared because you're going to get the probability of getting one R from one parent times the probability of getting another R from another parent. So that's where you get P squared. Q squared is the same thing. This is little r, though. So this is the probability of getting little r, little r. Then the probability of getting a heterozygote is doubled. Why? Because what's the probability that one parent gives a big R, or is here? What's the probability that parent can give a little r is here, and then there's two ways to get it. You can get a big R from mom, or you can get a big R from dad. You can get a little r from mom or a little r from dad. So you have to multiply times twice. Whatever the probability is of getting the heterozygote, it has to be multiplied times 2. And that gets you this equation that altogether, all these different genotypes, whatever their probability is, that has to equal 100%, because that's all you got in that population. So that's Hardy-Weinberg, the math of it. When you're looking at, you're going to obviously have to do the lab tutorial on your own. We'll discuss it when we meet again on Tuesday. Actually, you don't have to do it on your own. That is what we'll do on Tuesday. We'll walk through the lab tutorial. If you want to play around with it on your own, you can. But really, the focus is get that 9% of Khan Academy done by Monday or more. If you're not going to be up to 25% done by Monday, you got to get to that point by Monday. Are we good?
Like Tuesday?
Or Tuesday. I mean Tuesday, yes. The next time we meet. Okay? All right, guys. That's it. Have a good one.
I had a question. Can I stay out?
Yeah, you can ask the question. You guys make sure you clean up your areas, wipe it down. I hope did this all help? Did this all remind you of all the different contexts and information?
Yeah.
Good? All right. All right, go ahead, Isambuli. What do you need? Unless it's private, then you have to wait till everybody leaves.
No. Do you have any